In Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, one pope is consigned to the eighth circle of hell, a place reserved for the most corrupt and irredeemable sinners of the Church. This pope is Boniface VIII, a man whose reign was marked by brutality, scandal, and excess. He forced his predecessor to resign, imprisoned him until death, bullied kings, and burned cities that refused to bow to his will. Yet, what made him notorious even among contemporaries was not just his thirst for power, but the whispers of his forbidden pleasures. Boniface VIII was bisexual, unapologetically indulgent, and scandalously open about his desires. He seduced young boys in Rome, creating public rivalries over who received the Pope's attention and gifts. He allegedly engaged in affairs with women, including a mother and her daughter, violating celibacy, adultery, and incest simultaneously. The story of Boniface VIII's rise, indulgence, and fall is one of the darkest in the history of the Catholic Church. Stay with this story to its conclusion, because his ultimate fate is as shocking as his life, leaving a haunting question. How much power can corrupt, and how far can lust and ambition go before it destroys the one who wields them? Boniface VIII was born Benedetto Caetani into a noble family in 1235, and he climbed the ecclesiastical ladder with ambition and cunning. By the time Pope Celestine V, a hermit and deeply pious man, ascended the papal throne in 1294, Benedetto was a seasoned cardinal with eyes set on the highest office of Christendom. Celestine's holiness and simplicity made him ill-suited to the ruthless politics of Rome. Boniface pressured Celestine into resignation, exploiting his naivety and insecurities. The young cardinal presented arguments that resignation was canonically possible, but these were backed with relentless intimidation and manipulation. Celestine eventually abdicated, an act that would become one of the most controversial transitions in papal history. Once he assumed the papacy, Boniface did not hesitate to neutralize any potential threat. Celestine, who had once been considered morally infallible, was imprisoned in a castle where he languished until his death less than a year later. The message was clear: opposition to Boniface would not be tolerated. This ruthless efficiency characterized his early papacy. He consolidated power quickly, ensuring that every corner of the church answered to him. But while he displayed mastery over politics, it was his private life that would set him apart from every other pope of his era. Boniface VIII's papacy extended beyond Rome. It was an era in which the Pope sought to dominate all of Europe. He claimed supremacy over kings and emperors, insisting that salvation itself depended on submission to papal authority. His bull Unam Sanctum made clear that temporal rulers had no power independent of the church. Those who resisted faced severe consequences. Chroniclers recount that he ordered entire towns burned when rulers defied him, while dissenting nobility were imprisoned or publicly humiliated. Boniface treated Europe like a chessboard, moving armies, influencing succession, and punishing disobedience with a ruthless efficiency that terrified kings and commoners alike. Despite his political power, Boniface's actions drew enemies. His confrontations with monarchs, particularly King Philip IV of France, marked the beginning of a collision course that would ultimately cost him his life. Yet it wasn't just his political ruthlessness that made him infamous. It was his personal conduct, which scandalized even the most worldly citizens of Rome. Boniface VIII's sexual conduct was notorious, and his openness about it scandalized medieval society. He engaged in homosexual affairs with young boys, reportedly proclaiming that sodomy was no more a sin than rubbing your hands together. He did not hide his indulgences. Two of his lovers famously quarreled in the streets of Rome over who the Pope loved more and which of them received the finer gifts. The dispute even extended to the humiliating declaration of who had the right to call themselves the Pope's whore. This public display of sexual favoritism was unprecedented for a pope, creating an atmosphere in which gossip and scandal spread like wildfire. Boniface treated his private life as a theater of excess, where power and lust intertwined. But his relationships were not limited to men. Boniface VIII also had numerous affairs with women, an audacity that shocked even those accustomed to clerical corruption. Among these scandals was one that would become the most infamous of all: his alleged relationship with a mother and her daughter. The story of Boniface VIII's affair with a mother and her daughter is perhaps the most infamous legend of his papacy. Allegedly, he maintained simultaneous sexual relations with both women, violating multiple taboos at once. To contemporaries, this act was beyond immoral. It broke his vow of celibacy, violated the commandment against adultery, and crossed into the territory of incest. Chroniclers described it in hushed tones at first, then in open gossip that spread across Rome and into the courts of Europe. This scandal cemented Boniface's reputation as a pope who mocked morality itself. His indulgence in these forbidden pleasures stood in stark contrast to his public role as the spiritual shepherd of Christendom. To some, he represented the embodiment of hypocrisy, a pope who preached divine law while flagrantly breaking it himself. Even in an age where corruption was common, this scandal was exceptional. It became symbolic of everything that could go wrong when absolute power met unchecked desire. Boniface's excesses, both political and personal, created enemies across Europe. Chief among them was King Philip IV of France, who refused to acknowledge the Pope's supremacy over temporal affairs. Their conflict escalated as Boniface excommunicated allies of the king and attempted to assert control over French clergy and taxes. Philip retaliated by sending armed men to capture the Pope. In 1303, Boniface was kidnapped from his stronghold at Anagni, beaten and publicly humiliated. The incident shocked Europe. The Pope, once feared by kings and emperors alike, had been overpowered by his enemies. Though Boniface was eventually freed, the ordeal left him broken in body and spirit. He died shortly afterward, leaving a papacy remembered as much for its excesses and corruption as for its political dominance. His enemies had won in the temporal world, but his moral and spiritual legacy remained condemned. Even in death, Boniface VIII could not escape judgment. Dante Alighieri immortalized him in the Divine Comedy, placing him in the eighth circle of hell. Here, corrupt clergy were punished for betraying the sacred trust of their office, consigned to eternal suffering for sins committed with greed, lust, and abuse of power. Dante's condemnation reflected the widespread perception of Boniface as a pope who had abused his office for personal gain and pleasure. He was not remembered for acts of charity, theological brilliance, or spiritual guidance. Instead, he was remembered for cruelty, excess, and the most scandalous violations of morality imaginable. Through Dante's work, Boniface VIII became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked ambition and desire, a warning of what happens when spiritual authority is wielded for self-interest rather than divine service. The life of Boniface VIII is a story of power, lust, and ultimate downfall. He seized the papacy with cunning, ruled Europe with terror, and indulged in the most shocking personal scandals of his time. He violated every moral boundary, and yet he still demanded obedience and reverence. His story leaves a lasting question. When a spiritual leader becomes a man of excess, how does the world judge him? For Boniface, judgment came first in the streets of Anagni, then in the pages of Dante's epic, and finally in history itself. If you want to uncover more stories like this, stories that reveal the hidden and scandalous history of powerful figures, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. History is filled with secrets, some darker than this one, and the past is never as clean as we are told. Boniface VIII thought he would be remembered as the supreme authority of Christendom. Instead, he was remembered as a pope in hell, a warning that no crown, no robe, no throne can shield a man from the consequences of his actions.